Hey everyone, welcome back to Television Lit Review. My name is Elizabeth, and today we are going to analyze our two main characters from the TV show Supernatural. In any great story, pick a great story. The plot isn't driven forward by the surface events that are happening. What actually drives a story forward is a character and his strengths and his weaknesses and his reactions and decisions to the things that are happening, and which bring us to the final event, to the finale. So in Supernatural, the premise of this is the horror, scary stuff, ghosts, monsters, and also there was the promise that they were going to go find their father. That's, a little more character driven. But what actually encourages the audience to stay is the hero's journey. The hero's journey, there's a lot of preconceived notions about what the hero's journey is. A lot of people mistake that for the surface level things that are happening. The hero's journey actually doesn't refer to those things. Those things are surface plot points. The hero's journey actually refers to the hero's development and transformation, how he changes as a person through the events, how he's changed by the events by the end of the story. Foster says, a quest consists of 5 things. A, the quester. B, a place to go. C, a stated reason to go there. D, challenges and trials en route. And E, the real reason to go there. A quester, your hero, when he initially sets out to do something, no matter what it is, he has an idea in his head of why he's doing it. That's not actually what comes out of it. What comes out of it is self-knowledge and self-reflection. Foster says, the real reason for a quest never involves the stated reason. In fact, more often than not, the quester fails at the stated task. So why do they go, and why do we care? They go because of the stated task, mistakenly believing that it is their mission. We know, however, that their quest is educational. They don't know enough about the only subject that really matters, themselves. The real reason for a quest is always self-knowledge. I would amend that slightly. I would say the real reason for the quest is self-development. Well, you might actually succeed in doing what you intended to do when you left, but the audience stays because of how a character himself or herself is transformed by the process and how that relates to whether they succeed or fail in the end. A hero has to have a critical flaw. We have those things that we see about them, the positive things that we see about them that we like. But the reason we relate to them is because they have a critical flaw, something that they struggle with internally that is universal and it's relatable, because that's the critical flaw that they're going to have to overcome in order to be successful at the end. Nobody wants to hear about somebody that's completely perfect. We've all met those people, those people who just seem to have it all figured out and we kind of resent them for it. But it's also, it's boring. It doesn't go anywhere. There's nothing to learn. Somebody that doesn't have a critical flaw that's getting in their way of the story, it's boring. There's no reason for it because there's no place for that character to go. There's not a way for us to relate to them because none of us are perfect. The most important part of the story is the life lesson that your main character has to learn in order to be successful at the end. And the inner journey that they take, that's what the hero's journey is all about. Sometimes you get stories where the problem's not solved at the end. And oftentimes that happens kind of as a warning to us. These are the consequences of not learning the lesson. And the critical point is whether or not your main character learned his lesson and applied the lesson in his decisions and in his reactions in order to have a positive outcome in the end. So with all of that out of the way, let's talk about our characters. What are their strengths? And more importantly for the story, what are their weaknesses? In the prologue, Sam is a baby. And a baby represents innocence, represents purity, it represents hope because that they have their whole life ahead of them. But a baby is also not in control of anything. It represents just a lack of control and helplessness that, a baby just inherently has. So in the prologue, Sam Winchester is a baby. He represents, that purity that has been corrupted by the blood, but it also just represents the fact that he is not at fault for anything that happened in the prologue. So that's important for his characterization later. It's specifically not his fault. These are things that are happening to him and happening around him that he has zero control over. The next time that we see Sam is 22 years later. He's at Stanford University. But he obviously has some positive characteristics to him. He's very intelligent. We can tell because he's at Stanford University, but also in the way that he makes connections between different facts and he can bring them together. He's very driven, not just to accomplish things, but also to have the life that he wants to have. He's got his goals in mind and he's driven towards them, whatever they are. We clearly see that he has some strong morals. He doesn't even want Dean disrespecting the cops on the bridge. And he also has relatable desires. He wants to be safe and he wants to be secure. And these are things that we want for ourselves. He wants to get out of this life, not just because he hates, the abnormality of it. He wants to have a path forward that he doesn't get to have when he's a hunter. However, that kind of leads into what his negative features are. And a big part of his character is that he is very self-centered. He's focused on the things that he wants for himself. He's focused on the lifestyle that he wants for himself. Now, let me back up and say it's not a bad thing to want those things, but he is focused solely when he's talking to Dean. He's focused about what he wants for his own life, and he's not concerned about what Dean wants and what John wants. He's not willing to sacrifice the plan that he has for himself in order to go and find John. And this is something that we see throughout the series. When he eventually does want to go find Dad, it's not because he actually wants to make sure that he's safe. It's not because he wants to bring him back home. His reasons for doing it are centered on his own life and on his own desires and needs. He thinks a lot like John in this case. Once he does this, he'll have peace and he can go back to what he wants. He just wants to get it done so he can get back to Stanford, get back to his life, back to what he wants to do with his life. So even though his goals align with Dean's and align with John's, he's doing it for his own reasons. And in season 4, we see this as well. In that same line, he's very dismissive of other people's beliefs and other people's needs. He is very focused on what he wants, and therefore he believes that if someone's trying to force him to do something that he doesn't want to do, then it must be wrong. To him, okay, you can go and have those things, but don't pull me into it. He's not willing to change his mind. He's not prepared to see that he was wrong. He believes that he's right. And, when I'm talking about this, I make Sam seem to be almost the bad guy here. There are times when he's the bad guy, but he's not. Sam has a lot going for him. He is intelligent. He does have strong morals. He has a sense of right and wrong. He has relatable desires, but he does have this very strong underlying streak of, I want what I want. I'm right to want what I want, and you can't make me see otherwise. And he's going to have to come to grips with the fact that that is not always the right way to go about things. There are times when he needs to let that go. Let's talk about Dean for a second. One of the things you have to look at when you're introduced to a new character is what are they doing or what state are they in the very first time you see them. So in the prologue, we see Dean. He clearly cares about his brother. He comes up and gives him a kiss on the forehead. He says, "Good night, Sam." But here's the thing. The first time we see John, he comes in and Dean immediately turns around and runs up and jumps up in John's arm. This is kind of what kids do. They see somebody that they love and they run and they jump up and give them a great big hug. But the thing is that we see Dean running towards John, or at least John's ideals, through the first 2 seasons, I would say. He has a strong attachment to John. Having a great relationship with your parents, that's one thing. But he actually takes on John's personality. The arguments that he makes towards Sam in the pilot episode, you get the very strong implication that he's basically just parroting the things that his father says. So we see, at Stanford, he's got some obvious positive qualities and qualities that make us like him a lot. He's fun-loving, all right? He's automatically got that whole air of, I'm gonna have fun. He's very loyal. He's duty-driven. He has also relatable desires, and they're different from Sam's. He wants safety and security, but he wants it for other people. That's a very strong motivator for Dean. He wants everybody else to be safe. However, he's highly codependent. He can't exist on his own. He doesn't do well existing on his own or working on his own. He needs to have other people. At first, when we see that, that's John. That's not the reason why Dean does it. Dean does it because he's codependent on John, and John is doing it. Sam even calls him out on it. This is, partly how you know that it's a big deal is that Dean says, "I can't do this on my own." And Sam says, "Yes, you can. he has the physical capability to do it. He can do all the things that Sam can do. He can do all the things that John can do. But emotionally speaking, he can't do it alone. And Sam calls him out on it. He said, if you needed to, you could absolutely do this by yourself. You have the physical capability and the mental capability to do it, but he doesn't have the emotional capability. He is reliant on somebody else, and that's why he needs to get John back. And why he goes to get Sam. You know, in season 2, we get into the whole discussion. Was everything that Dad did right? Was everything that Dad taught us about monsters, is all of that right? This is when we see Dean start to question. But then the first thing he does when he loses Sam, when Sam dies, is he turns right around and he sells his soul to get Sam back. He can't lose his brother. He can't be alone. In Dream a Little Dream of Me, his dream self is telling him, your music, Dad's. Your clothes, Dad's. Do you even have an original thought? He's talking to a subconscious part of himself. He knows that this is his weakness. And when they go to heaven, when Zachariah is chasing him through heaven, you notice that everyone leaves you. You're not capable of being loved and things like that. That is a very deep insecurity that he has. He has a very deep running inability to be without other people and be without their love and be without their support. He needs that. And that's going to end up being his great flaw towards the end. We see that a lot in season 5. How does this relate to story structure? And that goes back to, the hero's journey bit. The hero's journey is not the surface things that are going on. The hero's journey is the transformative process. Because of that, you can't, structure a story just around physical events that are happening. You have to structure a story around the transformation that your character is going through. So I have another resource here that I'm going to be using a lot in these videos. It's called Save the Cat, written by Blake Snyder. Basically, it's an in-depth study and comparison of stories, of some of the greatest stories ever told across any number of media, analyzing other stories for story structure and finding the commonalities that make up a good story, how a great story is structured and put together. And this has everything to do with your character and their critical flaw, or flaws plural, and how the story is driven forward by those decisions and by that change or lack of change. So Snyder outlines 15 plot points, or what he calls beats. Writers and storytellers seem to instinctually know this. They structure their stories in such a way that the vast majority of stories actually can be broken down into, these 15 plot points that happen in roughly the same place and roughly the same order, across all great stories. Was originally published in May 2005. After the pilot was filmed, before the pilot ever aired. More than likely, this was not like a specific method that he used. But interestingly, Supernatural adheres to these 15 plot points and their placement nearly perfectly. I found that so interesting. It made me so excited. So these plot points and their placement, they are accurate across the initial story, the first 5 seasons. If you look at that as one big story, those plot points happen in the order and in the places that Blake Snyder says that they will. It's accurate within individual seasons. So if you look at season 1 as a story, those plot points are in the sequence, in the times that Snyder says they will, in season 2, in season 3, and so on. And then even within individual episodes, some of the individual episodes, not all of them, the timing doesn't always fall exactly because it's such a short period of time. But in some episodes, it's spot on, and that includes the pilot. The pilot episode follows this sequence nearly perfectly. I'm going to go through the 15 beats that Blake Snyder talks about in Save the Cat, because we're going to talk about them more through the series. So the first beat is the opening image. So the second plot point is the theme. You have the setup, which is the whole first 10%. You have the catalyst, which happens at approximately 10% into the story. Then you have the debate period, and that's roughly 10% to 20%. And at about the 20% mark, we have what's called, what Blake Snyder calls break into 2. That's because this is, it's breaking into the second act. After that, we have the B story introduction. So this would be a character or a concept that represents the theme. So we have the fun and games plot point. It's a multiple. It's a good, little bit, but it's the 20% ish to 50% ish. Some people call it the promise of the premise. Plot point that we have, or the next beat we have, is the midpoint, which, as it sounds, happens at pretty much the 50% mark of the story. And we have what he calls the bad guys close in, which is another, section. You get to the 75% mark, it's called all is lost. Some people call it the SOL. And then you have what's called the dark night of the soul. At the end of this section, you get the breakthrough, what Blake Snyder calls the break into three. You have the finale, and then you have the final image, which is a mirror image of the beginning. Now, this is the part of the video where I think I'm gonna make some enemies here. One last thing about characterization. I've so far been saying the protagonist singular. There's a reason for that. Virtually every story has only one main protagonist or main hero. You're probably thinking, what are you talking about? Sam and Dean are both heroes. They're both protagonists. They're both our main characters. Yes, they are. I agree. But even in the stories where there's more than one main character, where you have a group or a small group of people that are working together that are the main protagonist group, there is always one of them that is the most important. So how do you know which one it is? Is it Sam or is it Dean? We're gonna make some enemies here. There's a few different ways to tell who it is. One of the big ones is that it's the first character you're introduced to. When we're at Stanford, the first person we are introduced to is Sam. We see Sam for 2 or 3 minutes, 2 or 3 full minutes before Dean comes into the picture. And that's in such a short format, like a TV episode, a singular TV episode. That's actually a long time, a few minutes. But if you go back even before that to the prologue, the first 2 people we see are Mary and Dean. But we don't know their names until after that. The first person we are introduced to by name is Sam. The older brother goes up to the side of the crib and leans over and he says, "Good night, Sam." Sam is the first person we are introduced to by name. There's another way to tell. When you look at the hero's journey, you need a quester, a place to go, a stated reason to go there, trials and tribulations, and then the real reason to go there. Who in this episode is called to go do something? It's not Dean. Dean is the one who's calling Sam to go do something. But in addition to the fact that we've already established Sam's status quo, we see Dean popping in there and shaking things up by saying, "Hey, you need to come with me now." We don't get that with Dean. We don't get that moment where he's called off to do something. We get that with Sam. Another way you can tell is who has changed the most by the episode. But I was mentioning how the pilot episode actually follows that story structure that Blake Snyder put out there. The question is, who's changed the most by it? Who actually learned something by the end of the episode? Sam has changed the most by this episode just because he suddenly understands, oh, this is what happens. This is how you get sucked into an obsession like that. If you still don't believe me that Sam is the main protagonist, we're gonna go ahead and watch some video clips.
The 2 characters, and this is no secret, were written very much like a Luke Skywalker and a Han Solo.
The writers and producers have seen that works for the character, and it's kind of been part of the archetype all along. It's the same as Luke Skywalker, Harry Potter. It's the Joseph Campbell mythology.
For the first several seasons, Dean was just Sam's brother, and Sam was the chosen one to be the vessel for Lucifer. So essentially, Sam was kind of more the pivotal character as the original story was thought out. And so they wanted to get their Sam first before they got their Dean. And I read the script, and I went in because they were only reading for Sam's. I auditioned for Sam.
And he is, because in the beginning of Supernatural, Sam was the pinnacle character of the show, as some of you may know if you've seen the show. And so they wanted to cast Sam first, and there's a whole lot of stories to go along with that. I had read for Sam first, and blah, blah, blah. But Sam, the character of Sam, was #1 on the call sheet.
Now, all of that being said, Dean is still a vital character. He still goes through the same sorts of critical changes throughout the story. I really do hesitate to mark him as a secondary character, but if you have to pick one, it's Sam. So there we go. We've talked about Sam's characterization. We talked about Dean's characterization. We've talked about the importance of characterization in general. And we've talked about story structure and how it relates to our characters and how our characters will be changed by story structure. to be successful at the end. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you guys got something out of it. I hope you guys understand our characters a little bit more, and the kinds of changes, because we see it, we really do. We see it right in the pilot episode, what their major flaws are and how they're going to have to change, and we see these changes happen in season 5. If you guys like what you see, go ahead and like, comment, subscribe down below. It'll really help me to grow this channel. I will also have a link in the description to my Patreon so that you can get the extended versions of these videos as well as some exclusive content. I'm going to be doing my first exclusive video, but my very next video is going to be a Patreon exclusive, and what we're going to do is we're going to sit down and take some personality quizzes for Dean. We're going to sit down and talk about what Dean's Myers-Briggs personality type and his Enneagram personality type are. So we're going to just have some fun. Now that we've talked about Dean's characterizations, we're going to sit down and we're just going to figure out which personality type Dean is as a character. Shortly thereafter, I'll do another very similar video about Sam. So if you guys want to catch that, go ahead and check me out on Patreon. I'll have the link down in the description. And I hope to see you guys soon. Bye.